Welcome back to part 6 of Armstrong Sperry's Call It Courage, and we are going to get right back into it because I'm sure those of you coming straight from part 5 are now desperate to know what's about to happen. When we left off, Mafatu was out on the lagoon sailing and on his raft looking to get some fish. A hammerhead came by, crushed his fish trap. Uri was just running around like crazy. A wave came at the same time. Uri fell in the water. The wave got pushed away. The shark is coming in. We need to see what's about to happen. Uri, swimming frantically, tried to regain his position on the raft. There was desperation in the brown eyes, the puzzled eyes so faithful and true. Mafatu strained forward, his dog, his companion, out of reach. The hammerhead was moving in slowly, and at that moment a mighty rage stormed through the boy. He gripped his knife, then he was over the side of the raft in a clean, curving dive. Mafatu came up under his enemy. The shark spun about. Its rough hide scraped the flesh from the boy's shoulder. But in that instant, Mafatu stabbed, deep, deep into the white belly of the shark. There was a terrific impact. Water lashed to foam. Stunned, gasping, the boy fought for life and air. It seemed he would never reach the surface. That his lungs would burst. And at last his head broke water. Putting his face to the surface, he saw the great shark turn over fathoms deep. Blood flowed from the wound in its belly, and instantly gray shapes rushed in, other sharks tearing the wounded hammerhead to pieces. But Uri, where was he? Mafatu saw his dog then. Uri was trying to pull himself up on the raft. Mafatu seized him by the scruff and dragged him up to safety. Then he caught his dog to him and hugged him close, talking to him foolishly. Uri yelped for joy and licked his master's cheek. It wasn't until Mafatu reached the shore that he realized what he had done. He had killed the Mao, the shark, with his own hand, with nothing but a bone knife. He could never have done it for himself. Fear would have robbed his arm of all strength. He had done it for Uri, his dog, and he felt suddenly humble with gratitude. Now the adze was completed. Thus the canoe too was beginning to take finished shape. It was 15 feet long, 3 feet deep, and scarcely more than a foot wide. Often as he worked, the boy would pause to stand off and admire his craft. It was a beautiful canoe. How proud his father would be. Alas, that it was such slow work. When the hull had been hollowed out, it must be smoothed off with the adze and caulked with R2 gum. Then a mast must be made of pucketia, straight and true, a sail woven from pondonews, and there was rigging to be made of sennet, tough and strong as wire. The craft would have been finished sooner if only there were not so many things to interfere. Every day, for example, Mafatu climbed the plateau to his lookout. He had not missed one day since he arrived on the island. He knew that when the Eaters of Men came, they would sail by day. They would have to beat against the prevailing wind, and it would take them many hours to come from the smoking island. Mafatu would be able to see them from his lookout long before they arrived. If only he could be ready before they came. He must. He simply must. But that trip up the mountain every day took so much precious time. His canoe would have been finished days ago but for that. Today I will not go, the boy thought as his adze whirred and chipped. It takes too long. But then he sighed and laid down the tool. Caution was the better part of wisdom. He picked up his shining spear with its new shaft of bamboo and turned toward the trail that led to the high plateau. Uri leapt ahead, his nose keen-pointed to the ground. This day, as Mafatu climbed the rough trail through the jungle, he was preoccupied, lost in his thoughts. His mind was not in this business at all. He was thinking about the rigging of his canoe, planning how he could strengthen it here, tighten it there. Some instinct of danger must have made him pause, warning him to beware. There it was, just a rustle in the undergrowth, scarcely louder than an insect's hum. The boy drew up tense in listening. Uri had dashed off on some wild goose chase of his own. The boy stood rooted, alert, alone. He saw it then. A wild boar with lowered head, eyes red with hate. The flash of its wicked tusks. The animal pawed the ground suddenly. Its grunting snort broke the stillness. Mafatu knew a blind impulse to turn and run. Then he drew a deep breath and shouted out a challenge. Puaviri, wild pig! I, Mafatu, have come to kill you! The boar charged. Over the ground it tore as foam flew back from its tusks. The boy braced himself. He met its charge with a perfectly timed thrust of the spear. The boar impaled itself, shoulder deep, upon the spearhead. Mafatu was thrown off balance, sent spinning headlong. Over and over he rolled. He leapt to his feet in a panic, defenseless. But the boar toppled, gave a convulsive shudder, and lay still, dead. Mafatu was struck dumb. He had killed a wild boar. For a second he could not grasp the wonderful truth of it. Then he leapt wildly into the air, shouting, "Awe te awe, I have killed the pua! Do you hear me, Tavananui, my father? Your son has killed a boar!" Uri came leaping out of the jungle and barked himself nearly hoarse at the sight of the pig. "Oh, a fine one you are," Mafatu joked at his dog. "Where were you when I needed you? Off chasing butterflies, that's you. Was it for this I saved you from the teeth of the Ma'o? I've a mind not to give you one mouthful of pua." Uri hung his head and drooped his tail, but then brightened as Mafatu laughed joyously. "Oh, foolish one! Here, drag your share." The boy made a rude sled of bamboo and loaded the heavy animal onto it. Then he hitched a stout lianas vine around Uri's neck, and the dog threw his weight into the task. The two started home in triumph with their burden, Mafatu singing at the top of his lungs a lusty song of blood and battle. He was all Polynesian now, charged with the ancient fierceness of his race. Victory coursed like fire through his veins. There was nothing he would not have dared in this moment, nothing that he feared. Aye, but life was good. When they reached the campsite, Mafatu built up a roaring fire and set a pile of stones to heat. While the stones were heating, the boy cleaned the pig at the water's edge, then stuffed its empty belly with succulent ti leaves and red bananas. When at last the oven stones were white and smoking, Mafatu dragged the pig back to the fire and rolled it upon the hot umu oven that he had constructed. Then he covered it with layer upon layer of plantain leaves, dozens of them, to hold in the steam and allow the pork to cook through slowly. Uri leapt about, sniffing at the delicious odors, barking his delight. Pork! After weeks of fish, and more fish, how good it would taste! Besides, fish was not good for dogs. Too many small bones. Kiwi, no meat-eater, looked on calmly, wondering what all this disturbance was about. The bird was content with a coconut that Mafatu split open for him so that he might join in the feast. Mafatu's mouth fairly watered in anticipation, but even as he settled back to await the feast, his hands were busy. The sun gleamed brightly on the curving tusks that already he was making into a necklace. They formed almost a complete circle and were as white as bleached coral. Ay, how men's tongues would chatter when they saw this fine necklace. Even Grandfather Ruau's had been no finer than this. It was a strange picture on that lonely beach under the palms. A pig roasting on a fire, a boy lean and brown and whip strong making a boar's tooth necklace, a prancing yellow dog, a calm, wide-winged albatross pecking at a coconut. Mafatu slipped the necklace about his throat, and he could fairly feel its magic charging him with strength. He pulled the oven stones away from the umu, and there lay the pig, golden, glowing, done to a turn. Rich juices ran in little rivulets down its sides, and as Mafatu ate, one thought alone filled his mind, overshadowing even his enjoyment of this rare feast. Soon now he would be ready. He had killed the Ma'o, the shark, the pua, the wild boar, too. His canoe would soon be completed. And then he would return to Hikaru. Days later, the canoe was finally finished. Mafatu lashed the tough Purao outrigger into place with hands that trembled with anticipation. The woven sail was complete and ready, the rigging strong as wire. And there, it was all over. The boy could hardly wait to get his craft into the water. Placing logs under the curving stem of the canoe, he gave a shove and a push. It stirred, moved forward, quick with life. Another shove, and the craft slid into the lagoon, and there it floated lightly, easily as a gull poised for flight. Mafatu stood back and surveyed it with shining eyes. He could hardly believe that all these weeks of labor were at an end. Suddenly he was quiet, and with lifted head he offered up the prayer with which all ships were launched at Hikaru. Ta Roa, mighty one, my thanks to you in this task completed. Guide it on your back to safe harbor. Ta Roa e. The boy leapt into the stern, picked up the paddle, and ran up the sail. Uri sprang into the bow, yelping for very joy. Kiwi sailed far overhead on widespread wings. The breeze caught the sail, swelled it to a golden curve, and the outrigger leaned at a sharp angle and sped ahead toward the distant reef. Sprays of water flew back from the prow, and Mafatu's heart beat high. He let out the sheet, wrapped the sennit rope around his foot, and gripped the steering paddle with both hands. He was filled with pride in his canoe. Never had he been as happy as he was in this moment. Out toward the black reef, closer and closer, the canoe skimmed on a wide arc of speed. It was late afternoon, and the sun was setting in a blaze of glory, but the boy was reluctant to turn back. He knew that he should have climbed to the lookout that morning. This was the first day he had neglected that duty. But the temptation to finish his canoe had simply been too great. Tomorrow at daybreak he would climb the plateau for the last time. And then Hikaru. As the little craft skimmed out toward the barrier reef, the thunder of the surf increased in volume to an overwhelming sound. Waves born far south in the Antarctic ice fields, the home of all waves, broke their backs upon this coral rampart. Gathering far out, they charged the reef, like seahorses with flinging manes of foam. The surf shot skyward above its mist, seagulls swooped and darted. The reef thunder no longer filled Mafatu with unease. He had lived too close to it these past weeks. Out here, half a mile from shore, detached from all security of the land, he had come to believe that at last he had established a truce with Moana the sea god. His skill against the ocean's might. The boy skirted along the edge of the reef, lowered his sail, and dropped overboard the lump of coral which served as an anchor. He took out his fish line and baited the hook with a piece of crab meat. He wanted to enjoy to the full this new sensation of confidence in himself, this freedom from the sea's threat. He looked back at the land fondly, but without longing. The high peak, purple in the waning light, stood somber against the sky. The valleys were shadowed with mystery. All these weeks and weeks he had lived close to this island and been grateful for its bounty. But he had been born on an atoll, a low island, and all his life had been spent in the spaciousness of open sea and wind-swept palms. There was something gloomy and oppressive in this high island. The reef, this was part of his heritage. The sea at last was as much his element as the land. This realization flooded through him in a warm tide of content. He lowered his fish line, fastened it to the mid-thwart, and looked deep down into the clear water. He saw a scarlet rock-cod materialize, hang in the shadow of the canoe, nearly motionless save for the slight movement of its gills. With a sudden flip of its tail, it vanished. How fantastic was that undersea world! The boy saw branching staghorn corals as large as trees through which jellyfishes floated like a film of fog. He saw shoals of tiny mulletfish, like miniature arrowheads, the whole school scarcely larger than a child's hand. A conger eel drew its ugly head back within a shadowy cavern. Here, beside the wall of reef, Mafatu's bamboo fish trap hung suspended. Before he returned to shore, he would empty the trap. It had been nearly undisturbed since the hammerhead was killed. Each day it had yielded up a good supply of mulletfish or crayfish or lobsters. Here the wall of living coral descended to the lagoon floor. Its sides were pierced with caves of darkness, whose mystery the boy felt no desire to explore. Far below, perhaps 40 feet, the sandy floor of the lagoon was clear and green in the dappled light. A parrotfish emerged from the gloom, nibbled at Mafatu's bait momentarily, but then vanished. "Ah, these fish must be well fed. My piece of crab meat does not tempt them, Uri." The boy decided to give it up and content himself with the fish in the bamboo trap. He leaned over the gunwale and pulled it up out of the water. Through the openings in the cage, he could see 3 lobsters, bluish-green and fat. What luck! But as he dragged the heavy wet trap over the gunwale, the fiber cord that fastened the knife about his neck caught on an end of bamboo. The trap slipped, the cord snapped, the knife fell into the water. With dismay, the boy watched it descend. It spiraled rapidly, catching the sunlight as it dropped down to the sandy bottom. And there it lay, just under the edge of a branching staghorn coral. Mafatu eyed it uncertainly. His knife! The knife he had labored so hard to shape! He knew what he ought to do. He should dive in and retrieve it. To make another knife so fine would take days. Without it, he was seriously handicapped and at a disadvantage. He must get his knife back. But the reef wall looked dark and forbidding in the fading light. Its black holes were the home of the giant Fakeh, the octopus. The boy drew back in sudden panic. He had never dived as deep as this. It might even be deeper than he thought, for the clarity of the water confused all scale of distance. The knife looked so very near, yet there it lay, gleaming palely. The boy gazed down at it with longing. He remembered the morning he had found the whale's skeleton, the first one he had ever seen in his life. Surely Maui, god of the fishermen, had sent the whale there to die for Mafatu's use. The long hours that had gone into the making of the knife, it had saved Uri's life too. And now Uri in the bow of the canoe was looking at his master with eyes so puzzled and true. Mafatu drew a deep breath. How could he abandon his knife? Would Maui, the thought chilled him, think him still a coward? Was he still Mafatu, the boy who was afraid? He leapt to his feet, gave a brave hitch to the paro around his waist, and then he was overside in the water. He clung for a moment to the gunwale, breathing deeply, inhaling, then releasing the air in a long-drawn whistle. He prepared his lungs for the pressure of the depths. Many times he had seen the pearl divers do it. In the canoe lay a coral weight fastened to a length of sennet vine. Mafatu took this weight and held the cord in his toes. With a final deep breath, he descended feet first, allowing the weight to pull him downward to conserve energy and air. At about 20 feet, he released the coral, turned over, and swam for the bottom. Here the water was cool and green. The sunlight filtered from above in long oblique bands. Painted fishes fled before him. He saw a giant pahua, a clamshell, some 5 feet across and taller than he, its open lips waiting to snap shut upon fish or man. Green fronds of seaweed waved gently as if in some submarine wind. A shadow moved above the boy's head, and he glanced upward in alarm. Only a sand shark cruising harmlessly. An eel like a cold waving ribbon touched his leg and then was gone. The knife, there it lay. Ah, how sharp and bright it looked. Now the boy's hands were upon it. He seized it and sprang upward toward the light. But in that second a whiplash shot out from a cavern at his back. A lash like a length of rubber hose. The boy caught the flash of vacuum cups that lined its undersurface, and panic stabbed at his heart. It was the Fakeh, the octopus. Another lash whipped forth and encircled his waist. It drew taut. Then the octopus came forth from its den to face and kill its prey. Mafatu saw a purplish globe of body, eyes baleful and fixed as fate, a parrot mouth cruel and beaked that worked and wabbled. Another tentacle encircled the boy's leg. The knife! Desperately, Mafatu stabbed for one of the eyes. Then darkness clouded the water as the octopus siphoned out his venom. There, in submarine gloom, a boy fought for his life with the most dreaded monster of the deep. He could feel the sucking pressure of those terrible tentacles. His wind was almost gone. Blindly, Mafatu stabbed again, this time for the other eye. The blow, so wildly driven, struck true. The terrible grip relaxed, slacked. The tentacles grew limp. Then Mafatu was springing upward, drawn up toward light and air and life. When he reached the canoe, he hardly had enough strength to cling to the gunwale. But cling to the side he did, his breath coming in tearing gasps. Uri, beside himself, dashed from one end of the canoe to the other, crying piteously. Slowly, strength returned to the boy's limbs, warmth to his chilled soul. He dragged himself into the canoe and collapsed on the floor. He lay there as in a trance for what seemed an eternity. The sun had set. Dusk was rising up from the surface of the sea. Mafatu struggled upright and peered cautiously over the side of the canoe. The inky water had finally cleared, and down there, some 40 feet below, the octopus lay like a broken shadow. The white cups of its tentacles gleamed dully in the watery gloom. With shark line and hook, the boy fished up the Fakeh's body. As he dragged it into the canoe, one of the tentacles brushed his ankle. Its touch was clammy and of a deathly chill. Mafatu shuddered and shrank away. He had eaten squid and small octopi ever since he was born, but he knew he could not have touched a mouthful of this monster. He raised his spear and plunged it again and again into the body of his foe, shouting aloud a savage cry of triumph. 1,000 years of warrior heritage sounded in his cry. Once more, Maui had protected him. But what to do with the whakae? The boy decided that he would cut off the tentacles. They would dry up and shrink, but they would be still of prodigious size. And the people of Hikaru would say, "See? Mafatu killed the whakae single-handed. Awe te awe." Dusk, almost in an instant, deepened again into night. As Mafatu turned the nose of his canoe toward shore, the first stars were appearing, bright and close and friendly. There was the Southern Cross, a constellation pointing toward the end of the world. The lagoon was a black mirror dusted with starshine. Far below in the dark waters, illuminated fish moved and had their being. Like meteors, galaxies, constellations under the sea. The boy saw a line of light narrow as a blade, as the rare pala flashed away in its everlasting quest. A sand shark, like a phosphorescent ghost, darted after the pala, seized it in a swirl of luminous mist. The mist faded slowly. It was blood. Mysterious life forces were completing their cycle in those dark depths, even as on the earth and in the air above. This sea was no more to be feared than earth or air. It was only another element for man to conquer, and he, Mafatu, had done so. He had killed the whakae. As he dipped his paddle with a swinging rhythm, the rhythm of his thoughts swung in unison. Tomorrow I shall start home. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. The very thought of it set him aquiver. Tomorrow. He had been here so very long. He dragged the canoe up on the beach, placed the logs under the curving stem so that he might launch it easily on the morning. He would never again need to climb the high plateau to the lookout. Let the eaters of men come. As Mafatu waited for his supper to cook, he set about preparing for his homeward journey. He would start at daybreak with the ebbing tide. He would be ready this time. He filled bamboo containers with fresh water, sealed them with leaves that were gummed into place, watertight and secure. Then he stored them carefully in the canoe. He prepared a poi of bananas and sealed it likewise into containers. There it would ferment and sour, but become delicious to the taste. Then he picked a score or more of green drinking nuts and flung them into the canoe. And as he trotted back and forth across the beach and his supper steamed on the fire, one thought alone, like an insistent drumbeat, echoed in the boy's heart. Tomorrow I shall start home. Never again need he hang his head before his people. He had fought the sea for life, and won. He had sustained himself by his own wits and skill. He had faced loneliness and danger and death, if not without flinching, at least with courage. He had been sometimes deeply afraid, but he had faced fear, and faced it down. Surely that could be called courage. When he lay down to sleep that night, there was a profound thankfulness in his heart. "To Vananui," he whispered, "my father, I want you to be proud of me." And he fell into a heavy, dreamless sleep. Before dawn, he was awakened by a sound of measured booming, like the beating of a supernatural drum. Thump, 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 thump. It rose above the thunder of the reef, solemn and majestic, filling the night with sound. Instantly awake, listening with every sense, Mafatu sat upright on the mats. Far out on the reef, the seas burst and shot upward like sheeted ghosts in the moonlight. But it was not from that the sound came. There it was again. Thump, 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 thump. Steady as a pulse, beating in the heart of darkness. And then Mafatu knew. It was a sound of drums. The eaters of men had come. And we will stop there. We are rapidly approaching the end of the story. So as we wrap up this part 6, I hope you will join us for the finale of part 7 of Call It Courage.